Ohio State, baby, the name of the game, survive and advance. At the crib, getting a dub, never apologize for a win. Final score in Columbus, 21-17 over Nebraska for the Buckeyes. There's a lot to unpack from this game. And I think that there's probably more than what meets the eye, but we'll unpack it together. So make sure you're subscribed. If you're a Buckeye fan, make sure you're locked in, man. Y'all have a lot in front of you this year. It's going to be an exciting run, I think, here. Besides the Big Ten championship run, the college football playoff run will be exciting. So all that we're going to cover, all that we're going to talk about. Make sure you're locked in here. Also, make sure you're locked in over on my social platforms, Instagram, Twitter, at JD PicKell, the best place for us to interact over there. So here's what I want to make sure we say. There's a lot of people that are going to look at this spot and see Ohio State play a little bit lackluster and see what happened with Nebraska the week before and say, oh, man, what's Ohio State? Hey, Indiana just beat the brakes off Nebraska, and Ohio State's playing them at home to a 4-point game? What's going on? The spot in itself, I think, is really tricky because Ohio State now, if we all remember correctly, heartbreaker against Oregon, so you got to kind of circle the wagons and find some juice from that game going into this game after the bye week. Nebraska, I think, was more dangerous because of the loss to Indiana and how embarrassing it was. Nebraska came out with a purpose. Like we said it on the reaction to the Nebraska side of things, this was a spot where Matt Rule was not going to allow his team to stay on the campus. Like they were more dangerous this week than they would have been if they had won the game against Indiana or if they had somehow, lost a little bit closer. Like this was tricky because of all those things. And then also pair with it the fact this is a classic look-ahead spot if you're Ohio State. We're all human here. We all see the schedule the same now. Penn State, you're going there next week. And that's going to be the toughest test of your entire November slate here. To call a spade a spade. No knock on Michigan, but if you're an Ohio State fan, you're probably okay with a knock on Michigan. And then you add into that the fact that you are kind of shuffling around the offensive line and trying to find something over there. So you're not making excuses, but I think you also just, if we're going to be fair about this whole thing, going to be honest about this whole thing, this spot was always going to be tricky. That 25.5-point spread was always a little bit of fool's gold there. So let's be critical about this thing before we move on to the positive. Anytime I get asked, hey, you want bad news or good news first? I always say bad news so we can end with the good news. But let's start with the critical because I think that's probably what we got to do here. It's tell the truth Sunday. You got to find a way to run the football. Pretty simplistic. Not super groundbreaking stuff right there. And I understand the offensive line being moved around. I think that as they progress, as long as they can get some continuity with one unit, whenever that happens, they'll be in good shape because of who Chip Kelly is. But still, man, to be in this spot, you would have liked to see a better output than 2 yards a carry. Like with the backfield you have, even with the offensive line being moved around, I think you're a little bit concerned that there wasn't more there. And going back to what I said about Chip Kelly, yes, long-term, I think, as long as you can get something with the same unit consistently, you're going to be in good shape. But, there's some part of you that's got to think a little bit today, man, we hired this guy to do more with less on the offensive line. And that's not to knock the offensive line. That's just who Chip Kelly has been throughout his career. Over at Oregon, they're running for darn near 1,000 yards a game, it felt like, with 3 stars on the offensive line. Why? Because they played well together. They played well within the scheme. Didn't see that as much yesterday. So you kind of chalk that up to the offensive line being what it is. But again, need to see some more there. You also, just if we're going to be transparent about this, would have liked to see a little bit more of a pep in the step from Ohio State in this spot. Because, again, the Oregon game, the bye week, Nebraska rolling into town. Okay, hey, chance to kind of get that bad taste out of our mouth. I would have loved to see Ohio State treat this game the same way they did the Oregon game. And that's probably being idealistic. I get that. But I do just think it's worth maybe at least a touch point there saying, hey, why don't we treat every game like it's the national championship? Why can't we play with the same intensity? Because the roster's never going to be the issue for Ohio State in every single game. Whether they play Oregon again, whether they play Texas or Georgia down the line, they will not be the lesser team from a roster talent perspective. They have everything that they need. So what it comes down to is, can you play the best football when your best is required? Can you continue to trend upward? And that was kind of the thing we said about Ohio State going into the week was okay, great moment against Oregon. You didn't win, but great output, great showing there, as long as it's consistent. As long as that's who you are now when we get into November and into December. You look at the previous showings from Ohio State teams under Ryan Day, and I think you can make the argument that those are teams that have played their best football too early. All right? You look at the the Notre Dame win the previous 2 years. Look at the Penn State win the previous 2 years. Great wins, but you're like, hey, we want to have those big moments against the Michigans. Again, in the college football playoff, like we want to see that output when it matters most. To put it simply, we want to continue to trend upward, or at the very least, stay consistent across the board. Now, the good news here is you still won on a day that wasn't your best day. And as much as we talk about being idealistic and, hey, you would have liked to see the showing that you had against Oregon show up against Nebraska and continue from that kind of a spot, these are still 18 to 22-year-olds. This is still the most volatile sport on the face of the planet. And it's why we love it. And every single team, whether you win a national championship or not, at some point in time, you're going to show up and it's not going to be your best performance. But the national title teams, the teams that hoist real deal hardware, they're able to find a way. They're able to eke out wins, to find matchups, to be gritty and get it done. And that's the thing here. You were able to take advantage of what you're supposed to take advantage of, and that is the perimeter. Like, they're going to consistently have this trump card they can throw down there that Joel Klatt mentioned yesterday. For those of y'all that play Crazy Eights, they will have the Crazy Eight they can throw down with Jeremiah Smith, with Emeka Egbuka, any given Saturday. And Will Howard, give him credit, man. A bunch of people knocking him and what he did against Oregon, and we were here saying, okay, if he plays at that level here every single game going forward, Ohio State's going to win the whole darn thing, just so we're on the same page there. Yesterday, 13 for 16, one interception. You don't love it, but 3 touchdowns. 2 crucial ones, downfield strikes to Jeremiah Smith and the other to Emeka Egbuka. Like, they're going to be in good shape here. Excuse me, to Carnell Tate. Quinshon Judkins also had the other catch. But Emeka Egbuka, not a bad day at the office. 3 for 20. It is what it is. Probably want to see a little more production there. You hear what I'm saying? Will Howard being able to stretch the field like that to a Jeremiah Smith, to a Carnell Tate. And at the end of the day, saying, hey, listen, these are the guys that are going to go win for us. These are the guys that ultimately we just have more of these dudes on the perimeter than you, and that's how we're going to win the football game. It doesn't. Nobody looks back and says, well, how much did they win by? Well, what is does that win count for less because Ohio State had to throw the ball to win? No, of course not. Like, you take it how you can get it, man. With the secondary, are there things you probably want to clean up there defensively? Sure, 100%. You want to run the football better? Of course. But at the end of the day, again, finding a way to win when it's maybe not your best day, there's some value in that. I think there's a lot of value in that. Here's what I'll also say. Great teams' quarterbacks make plays to win. Those are the teams that play for hardware in December, and in this case, into January. Will Howard continues to show himself to be a difference maker for Ohio State. He's not just along for the ride. He's not just a cog in the machine. He's not just, going to be the quarterback listed on the roster here and then everybody else does everything else. Like, he is going to be a real deal driver of Ohio State's success. If that wasn't clear from the Oregon game, it should be clear in this game. Because without his effort downfield, without that Carnell Tate strike, without that Jeremiah Smith strike, I don't know if you win the football game. So, the good news is, I think there's enough pieces here for Ohio State that are going to continue to trend upward because, quite frankly, this was just Game 7 for a lot of those key pieces. Jeremiah Smith, Game 7. Will Howard, Game 7. Caleb Downs, Game 7. Quinshon Judkins, Game 7. I say all that because they're going to get better from this point forward. Like, I don't think we've seen those guys' best football in the 7th game of the season or 7 games through the season. They have a lot more in front of them. And so with that being the case, that leads me to believe everything else on the roster they have around those guys that we already know are quality, pieces, they're going to be in good shape. So that's nice in theory. Does it translate in practice? I think it will. That's a big reason why I'm high on Ohio State. So if they trend upward, man, again, you don't apologize for getting a win, but if they keep playing their best football and have their best football in front of them, Ohio State's going to be right there at the end of this thing. And that's how Buckeye fans want it. Make sure you're locked in. Make sure you're subscribed. Again, Instagram, Twitter, @JodyPicKell. Get at me on there. Let me know how you felt about Ohio State yesterday. Winning close, but winning nonetheless. Don't apologize for it. We're going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all next time.